People like you don't belong in this building." Claire Whitmore said it loud enough for the entire marble lobby to hear, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a metronome counting down to disaster. Then she slapped the paper coffee cup out of my hand. Hot coffee splashed across the white tile, dark liquid crawling toward my worn work boots, while the smell of burnt espresso and lemon floor polish mixed in the cold air-conditioned lobby. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A few residents froze beside the elevators holding grocery bags and designer purses, pretending not to stare while secretly enjoying the show. Claire stood there in her cream-colored blazer with a gold security badge hanging from her neck like she was queen of the whole building. Her blonde hair looked sprayed into place so perfectly it could survive a hurricane. She folded her arms slowly and looked me up and down at my old navy jacket, my scuffed toolbox, my faded jeans. "Service entrance is around back," she said. "Residents shouldn't have to look at maintenance workers wandering through the front lobby." The security guard beside her shifted uncomfortably, but he stayed silent. Smart man. Even from 20 feet away, you could smell Claire's expensive perfume cutting through the scent of fresh paint and coffee beans from the cafe near the elevators. "I'm here for a scheduled inspection," I said calmly. "Unit 42B. Claire smiled the way rich people smile when they think they're untouchable. "Cold. Practiced. Empty." "No, you're not," she replied. "You don't even belong on this property." Then she took my visitor badge right out of my hand and snapped it in half. Plastic cracked sharply through the lobby silence. Somewhere behind me, I heard somebody whisper, "Damn." Claire pointed toward the revolving doors. "Either you leave now," she said, "or I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I looked down at the coffee soaking into the marble grout lines. Funny thing about power. The people who abuse it the most are usually the ones borrowing it. Claire Whitmore just didn't know that yet. The security guard handed me a stack of paper towels without making eye contact. I crouched down and wiped coffee off the marble floor, while Claire stood over me like she was supervising a crime scene cleanup, instead of humiliating another human being before breakfast. The cold tile pressed through my jeans, and the sharp smell of roasted coffee still hung in the lobby air. Funny thing is, 15 years earlier, I had cleaned this exact floor every night for $11 an hour. Back then, Harbor Point Tower was not wrapped in imported Italian marble and fake luxury branding. It was just another aging Chicago high-rise with flickering hallway lights and broken freight elevators that screamed loud enough to wake half the building. I used to work graveyard maintenance shifts here while finishing community college during the day. I knew every pipe behind these walls, every leak, every shortcut contractors buried behind fresh paint. The old building manager, Frank DeLuca, taught me something during one brutal January winter while we were fixing a frozen boiler line in the basement. "Buildings are like people," he told me while steam hissed around us. "The expensive parts are usually hiding the biggest problems." Turns out Frank was right about more than plumbing. I stood up slowly and tossed the soaked paper towels into a stainless steel trash can beside the concierge desk. Claire was still glaring at me with that tight smile people use when they enjoy having authority over someone weaker. Around us, residents shuffled awkwardly toward the elevators pretending not to listen. I recognized some of their faces from tenant reports I reviewed 3 nights ago. Late maintenance requests, complaints about missing reserve funds, sudden fee increases, a retired teacher in 19C whose ceiling had leaked for 6 months, while Claire approved a $70,000 lobby chandelier nobody needed. The chandelier sparkled overhead right now, throwing gold reflections across the marble like a casino lobby. Expensive distractions. Claire stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You maintenance people always think rules do not apply to you." I almost smiled at that, because technically, there was no rule in this entire building that applied to me anymore. Claire snapped her fingers at the security guard like he was a valet at some country club fundraiser. "Escort him out," she said, "and make sure he understands he is banned from resident areas permanently." The words echoed off the marble walls while the elevator cables hummed somewhere above us. I could feel dozens of eyes following me across the lobby. Rich people always pretend not to stare, but they never miss free entertainment. The guard hesitated for half a second before stepping beside me. "Sir, maybe it is better if you head out for now." His voice sounded embarrassed. I did not blame him. Men like him work double shifts just to survive in buildings run by people like Claire Whitmore. I picked up my toolbox and started walking toward the back hallway without arguing. Claire looked almost disappointed. Bullies hate calm people. Calm makes them nervous. The farther I moved from the shiny lobby, the more the building started smelling familiar again. Dust, warm electrical wiring, industrial cleaner. The perfume and fake luxury faded the second I crossed into the maintenance corridor behind the elevators. That was the real Harbor Point Tower hiding behind the polished marble mask. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead exactly the way they used to 15 years ago. Same narrow concrete hallways. Same chipped pipes running along the ceiling. Same cold air flowing from overworked ventilation units. I ran my hand along the painted cinder block wall while security followed behind me. "You used to work here?" he asked quietly. "Long time ago," I said. He nodded slowly like something finally made sense. In the basement level, I noticed a fresh keypad installed outside the electrical control room. Cheap model. Wrong wiring job. Whoever installed it had cut corners. I also noticed something else. Camera 6 above the loading dock had its red recording light turned off. Interesting. Very interesting. Upstairs, Claire was probably still enjoying her little performance in the lobby while residents whispered about the maintenance guy she put in his place. But buildings talk if you know how to listen. Loose wiring. Fake invoices. Disabled cameras. Deferred repairs hidden behind luxury renovations. Harbor Point Tower was full of quiet little secrets. And every secret eventually leaves a paper trail. The basement air felt colder than the lobby, thick with the metallic smell of old pipes and overheated wiring. Somewhere deep in the building, a water pump rattled like loose teeth behind concrete walls. I stood near the maintenance office pretending to study a breaker panel while two janitors rolled carts past me without paying attention. That was the thing about buildings like Harbor Point Tower. Rich residents noticed chandeliers and marble countertops. Workers noticed everything else. The hidden stuff. The expensive stuff. The dangerous stuff. I opened my old leather notebook and wrote down 3 things. Disabled loading dock camera. New keypad installation. Emergency reserve fund discrepancies from tenant complaints. Patterns start small before they become scandals. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Unknown number. I answered quietly. "Mr. Mercer," a nervous voice whispered. "This is Daniel from accounting. I heard Claire banned you from the building." I leaned against the concrete wall and listened to the low electric hum around me. "Word travels fast," I said. Daniel lowered his voice even further. "She is panicking because the annual audit starts Friday." There it was. The first crack in the glass. "Anything I should know?" I asked. Silence stretched for a second. Then I heard papers shuffling. The renovation invoices do not match the contractor reports. And some reserve accounts are missing transfers. Missing transfers. Interesting phrase. Not stolen. Not missing money. Missing transfers. Accounting people always choose words carefully when they are scared. Upstairs, an elevator bell chimed softly through the ceiling. I could almost picture Claire standing in the lobby greeting wealthy residents with that polished fake smile while quietly bleeding the building dry behind closed doors. Daniel spoke again. "Be careful. Claire has friends on the board." "Everybody has friends when money is flowing," I replied. "That usually changes when the flow stops." I hung up and slipped the notebook back into my jacket. Then I noticed the old freight elevator door sitting half open at the end of the hallway. Fresh scrape marks covered the metal frame. Something heavy had been moved recently. Very recently. The smell of fresh machine oil still lingered in the air. Harbor Point Tower was starting to talk louder now, and every floor of this place sounded more nervous than the one above it. By 6:30 that evening, Harbor Point Tower smelled like catered shrimp trays and expensive wine. Claire had organized an emergency board meeting on the 32nd floor, and half the residents showed up dressed like they were attending a charity gala instead of a financial review. Through the lobby windows, Chicago rain streaked across the glass in silver lines while thunder rolled somewhere over Lake Michigan. I stood outside near the loading dock entrance watching black sedans pull into the valet lane one after another. Claire loved public theater. If she was planning something, she wanted an audience. The same security guard from earlier stepped outside, holding a clipboard against his chest. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the awning beside him. "Mr. Whitmore requested formal trespass paperwork," he said carefully. "She says you are prohibited from entering resident areas permanently." I took the paper from his hand and read it slowly while cold wind pushed diesel fumes from the alley into the air. Temporary ban notice. Unauthorized maintenance impersonation. Security concern. I almost laughed. The woman really thought paperwork created truth. Do you believe this? I asked him quietly. He hesitated again. Same nervous pause as before. Honestly, no. Smart man. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into my jacket pocket beside my notebook. Upstairs, I could already hear muffled music drifting down through the atrium from the boardroom reception area. Claire always added soft jazz to meetings when she wanted to look sophisticated. Cheap trick, like putting perfume on rotten wood. A black SUV rolled up to the curb beside the entrance. Two men stepped out wearing dark suits and carrying leather document cases. Neither one looked at the residents. Neither one looked at Claire's decorative fountain glowing blue beside the lobby doors. They walked straight past me toward the service elevator entrance. One of them gave me the smallest nod, barely noticeable unless you were expecting it. The auditors had arrived. Perfect timing. Through the rain-streaked glass, I spotted Claire inside greeting board members with champagne and polished smiles. Then her eyes landed on me standing outside under the loading dock light. Her expression hardened instantly. She walked toward the lobby doors fast enough for her heels to echo across the marble. I thought I made myself clear this morning, she snapped through the glass. Nobody wants you here. That was the funny part. This entire building was about to learn exactly who did. The rain had turned heavier by the time the board meeting officially started. Water hammered against the 32nd floor windows while lightning flashed over downtown Chicago, throwing pale white reflections across the polished conference table inside the executive lounge. I entered through the service corridor instead of the main lobby this time. Nobody stopped me. Funny how buildings become easier to navigate once you know where the blind spots are. The freight elevator carried me upward with a low mechanical groan while fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Same old elevator. Same vibration in the floor panels near the 12th floor. Harbor Point Tower still remembered me even if Claire Whitmore did not. When the elevator doors opened, the warm smell of catered food and expensive liquor hit me immediately. Soft jazz drifted through hidden ceiling speakers while board members laughed around crystal glasses near the windows. Claire stood at the center of the room wearing a white blazer now instead of cream, smiling like a politician at a fundraiser. She stopped smiling the second she saw me. Are you insane? She snapped loudly enough for half the room to turn around. Security. Conversations died instantly. The room went quiet except for distant thunder outside and the soft hum of recessed lighting above the table. I noticed several board members studying me curiously now. Not mocking anymore. Curious. That was new. Claire marched toward me holding a folder tight against her chest. You were formally banned from this property, she hissed. Leave before I call the police. I looked past her toward the far end of the conference room. 3 people had just entered quietly through the side doors. Dark suits. Leather portfolios. Calm faces. One woman carried a thick binder marked forensic audit in black lettering across the cover. Claire had not noticed them yet. She was too focused on humiliating me again. This meeting concerns ownership restructuring and reserve compliance. She continued proudly to the room. Certain disruptive individuals are attempting to interfere with building operations. Ownership restructuring. There it was. The phrase she should have researched before opening her mouth. I slowly set my old toolbox down beside the conference table. Metal clanged softly against polished wood. Every eye in the room followed the sound. Then one of the auditors finally spoke from behind Claire. Actually, the older man said calmly while opening his portfolio, Mr. Mercer is the reason this meeting exists at all. The silence inside that boardroom felt heavier than the thunder outside. Claire turned slowly toward the auditors behind her, confusion spreading across her face for the first time all day. The older man adjusted his glasses and placed a thick stack of documents onto the conference table with a flat thud that echoed through the room. Nathan Mercer, he said calmly, founder and managing partner of Mercer Urban Capital. Effective last Friday, majority ownership of Harbor Point Tower transferred under his authority. You could actually hear people stop breathing. One resident nearly dropped a champagne glass. Another board member pulled out his phone so fast his chair scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. Claire stared at me like her brain could not process what her eyes were seeing. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded trespass notice she gave me downstairs earlier that evening. The paper still smelled faintly like her floral perfume. I placed it carefully on the conference table beside the audit binders. You banned me from my own building, I said quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The soft jazz still played through the ceiling speakers, which somehow made the whole moment even more uncomfortable. Claire's face drained of color. That is impossible, she whispered. You are maintenance. I almost smiled at that. I was maintenance, I corrected her. Long before you started treating this place like your personal kingdom. One of the forensic auditors opened a binder and projected financial records onto the large screen behind the board table. Numbers filled the room in cold white light. Missing reserve transfers. Inflated renovation contracts. Duplicate vendor payments. The chandelier Claire bragged about earlier had cost nearly 3 times market value. Somebody at the far end of the room muttered, "Holy hell." Claire suddenly straightened her posture like she could still control the situation through pure confidence alone. These accusations are outrageous, she snapped. This is a misunderstanding. But the problem with lies is they sound weaker once paperwork enters the room. The auditor calmly slid another file across the table. We also recovered deleted camera footage from loading dock camera 6. That landed hard, because now Claire knew exactly how much trouble she was in. Outside the windows, lightning flashed over Lake Michigan again, while Harbor Point Tower finally stopped pretending to be something it was not. The room turned ugly fast after the documents hit the screen. Not loud ugly, quiet ugly. The kind where expensive people suddenly stop smiling because they realize the rules actually apply to them. Rain hammered the windows harder now, and every flash of lightning lit Claire Whitmore's face in pale bursts while the auditors walked the board through transaction after transaction. Inflated vendor contracts. Unauthorized reserve withdrawals. Maintenance budgets redirected into cosmetic renovations for units owned by Claire's friends. One elderly resident near the end of the table adjusted his glasses and whispered, "We paid special assessments for this." Nobody answered him. They did not need to. The numbers answered for everybody. Claire kept trying to interrupt, but every sentence sounded weaker than the last. Her polished confidence was cracking apart right there under the conference room lights. These expenses were approved by the board, she insisted while flipping through papers with trembling fingers. The lead auditor nodded calmly. Approved using falsified summaries and edited reserve reports. That landed like a concrete block. Across the room, one board member slowly removed his Harbor Point Committee pin and set it on the table without saying a word. Another resident stood up and walked toward the windows, rubbing his forehead like he suddenly had a migraine. I stayed quiet. People reveal themselves when panic enters the room. Claire finally turned toward me again, desperate now instead of arrogant. You planned this. Her voice sounded thinner than before. No, I replied. You planned this yourself. I just showed up early. The silence after that was beautiful. Then came the final blow. The security chief entered the room, holding a small red access card in his hand. Same red card Claire wore around her neck every day like a crown jewel. He stopped beside her chair. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully. "Ownership has revoked your building credentials effective immediately." The soft electronic chirp from his scanner echoed through the room as her access card deactivated. Tiny sound. Huge consequence. Claire stared at the dead badge in disbelief while residents watched the woman who controlled this building for 6 years lose power in less than 60 seconds. Funny how fast kingdoms collapse once the paperwork catches up. By midnight, Harbor Point Tower felt like a completely different building. The storm had finally drifted east over the lake, leaving rainwater streaked across the giant lobby windows, while maintenance crews quietly rolled drying fans across the marble floor downstairs. Most of the residents had gone home hours earlier, but the tension still clung to the air like cigarette smoke after a long poker game. Claire Whitmore left through the side entrance carrying a cardboard box filled with framed certificates and office supplies. No dramatic speech. No final threat. Just the soft sound of expensive heels fading into the wet Chicago night while a security officer held the door open beside her. Funny how power disappears. One minute people orbit around you like planets around the sun. The next minute nobody even offers you an umbrella. I stood alone near the concierge desk, holding a fresh cup of coffee from the lobby cafe. Same cheap roast as this morning. Same burnt smell drifting through the air vents. Only difference was nobody was trying to slap it out of my hand now. The overnight janitor pushed his cleaning cart across the marble floor nearby, And for a second, I saw myself again at 23 years old working graveyard shifts in this exact lobby. Same buzzing lights. Same cold air blowing from the revolving doors every time somebody rich walked in, pretending not to notice the workers around them. Long day, the janitor asked me with a tired smile. I nodded once and handed him the untouched coffee. For the night shift, I said. He looked surprised for a second before quietly thanking me. Simple gesture, but buildings remember things like that. Respect leaves marks too. Across the lobby, workers had already started removing Claire's oversized welcome banner from the wall beside the elevators. The tape peeled away slowly with a dry, ripping sound that echoed through the empty marble space. Harbor Point Tower looked cleaner without it. More honest somehow. I slipped my hands into my jacket pockets and stared out at the wet city lights reflecting across Michigan Avenue. 15 years ago, I cleaned this building while invisible to everybody living inside it. Tonight, I owned it. And the funny thing about real power is this. It does not scream across lobbies or wave badges in people's faces. Real power stays quiet, then signs the paperwork when the time comes.